So for our final panel of the day, we're going to have a talk and a conversation. The chair will be Jana Schmidt, who some of you know because she was the academic program director last year at the Hannah Arendt Center and has also been a fellow here and is now, very happy to say, an assistant professor of German here at Bard College. And the talk will be by Luise Knott, who's a writer and researcher and literary critic and translator based in Berlin in Germany. She's written many books. She's translated the letters, edited the letters of Hannah Arendt and Gershom Scholem, which have been cited and talked about a lot today, including on all the t-shirts that you see walking around. She also wrote a wonderful book called Verlernen, or Unlearning, translated into English, about Hannah Arendt's way of unlearning things and the way she writes. And this is her newest book. It's not yet out in English, but coming, or hopefully. It's 370 Riverside Drive, 730 Riverside Drive, Hannah Arendt and Ralph Ellison. Hannah Arendt lived at 370 Riverside Drive, and Ralph Ellison lived at 730 Riverside Drive. And it's about their, well, she'll tell you, but their attempted communication and what we make of it. Please welcome Luise Knott.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers, Roger and Tina especially, for inviting me and for the warm welcome I have here at Bard. Sorry, I'm speaking in English, but my English is somehow not that fine. And thanks for Jana for hosting the debate. In 2006, Barbara Hahn and I organized an exhibition on Hannah Arendt and Hannah Arendt's conversation with poets and with poetry, which brought me here to Bard for the first time, and especially, of course, to the Hannah Arendt Library. It's very, very nice to be back here. I think we now, somehow we put a magnifying glass on one correspondence, on one debate, maybe discourse, and unlike what we did today, the whole day, but I think it all will come in, and I'm interested. My focus today is on Hannah Arendt's conversation, or non-conversation, with the African-American writer Ralph Ellison. As far as we know, Ellison and Arendt only met in person twice, and maybe they never spoke directly. But for all their differences, the two had something essential in common. They both lived in the awareness that when you are persecuted or oppressed because of your affiliation, you must defend oneself as a member of that group, as a Jew or as an African American. But it's also important not to get entangled in the net of your own affiliation, and instead do speak to the world proudly with your own Jewish Afro-American voice. This is how we create and recreate constantly the sphere of public friendship that Roger talked about, so illuminating in the morning. Arendt was convinced that we, man, the individual, lives his or her life. It's only in speaking with and listening to each other that makes us human, language being the common ground to negotiate the world. In conversations, we tell one another that what we have experienced, and in these exchanges, our eyes are opened to ever new sides of reality. We keep each other in mind. And by that, we realize our possibility of commonly shaping the world. We recognize ourselves in the world, in our dissimilarities. I first planned to title this lecture in Transatlantic Entanglements, because what I want to talk about here are experiences that span the Atlantic. For many years after her arrival in 1941, Arendt lived like all immigrants and all refugees out of intellectual suitcases that she had rescued from her culture of origin. And at the same time, she lived in deep despair, knowing that totalitarianism was a force that threatened to completely redefine the essence of human being. With her foreigner's eyes, she saw what many in the country did not. She called herself, following Schiller, the girl from afar. And yet there were blind spots in the society to which she had emigrated that also remained blind to her, opaque to her. In Hannah Arendt's archives, there is a carbon copy of a letter to Ralph Ellison, the author of Invisible Man. The letter, dated July 25th, 1965, is a response to an interview in which Ellison sharply attacked Hannah Arendt. We are talking about that later. Here is the letter, first of all. I quote from it only parts. Dear Mr. Ellison, you're entirely right. It's precisely this ideal of sacrifice which I didn't understand. I received, of course, a great many criticism about this article from the side of my liberal friends, or rather non-friends, which I must confess didn't bother me. But I knew that I was somehow wrong and thought that I hadn't grasped the element of stark violence or of elementary bodily fear in the situation. But your remarks seemed to me so entirely right that I now see that I simply didn't understand the complexities in the situation. 20 lines, rather formally, and I think 5 times the word understand. Why, I wondered, when I saw this letter, did Arendt write this letter? And what was the concept of the ideal of sacrifice that she only understood after reading Ellison's critique of hers, and the sharp critique? This was the beginning of my research for my book, Riverside Drive, that Roger mentioned. My question was, what made her write in 65, I didn't understand, and what was her new, what was her new understanding about, and what were the consequences of writing the letter down? Evidently, according to my provisorial thesis here, this letter was a repository. Nothing more and nothing less. It had 2 addresses. To Ellison, the letter said, "You're right. I failed to see something essential." And to herself, she might have thought, what is it? What can I do against it? Pardon? You can. Thank you. That's better? Mm-hmm. So, to Ellison, it had 2 addresses. To Ellison, the letter said, "You're right. I failed to see something essential." And to herself, she might have thought, ideal of sacrifice, I ought to rethink this more deeply, but at the moment I do not have time and energy for that. As an essayist, I'm not so much interested in the question whether to defend or to judge Hannah Arendt's viewpoints. What I'm asking now is instead how viewpoints are formed, how they solidify and perhaps become mutable again through exchanges, through conversations, through controversies, perhaps. One of her suitcases was, as we all know, the experience of Jews in European history. In her research that she did in 1930s in France, Arendt had found out that Jews in Germany were over centuries granted privileges, prerogatives, exceptional rights that could be rescinded at any moment and were, in fact, rescinded time and again. With these privileges, their lives depended on those who granted them. So it's not coincidence that Arendt concluded one of her studies with the German-French Jewish poet Heinrich Heine in mind, arguing that the only thing that counted for Jews over the hundreds of years was the attainment of equality before the law. In the Weimar Republic, after 1919, Jews had gained such political equality, but from beginning 1933 on, Arendt had to witness the Nazi depriving the Jews step by step of their rights, leaving them unprotected, indeed declaring them outlawed. And we know today that the persecution of Jews began with this elimination of rights, and this ultimately set in motion their annihilation. Every suitcase contains personal memories. As we know, Jews who fled persecution in Europe to the United States were often particularly sensitive to the deprivation of blacks' rights. Arendt too considered solidarity with Black Americans as an oppressed people to be a matter of course. Yet, well into the 50s, she had not publicly addressed this subject. That changed in 57 with the incidents in Little Rock, as we know. Obviously, memories of anti-Semite scenes of her childhood came up when she saw the photos of proud young Black students escorted to school by soldiers through a hostile mob. Here is one. We know that after Arendt had expressed in her reflections on Little Rock her indignation at Black parents exposing their children to these humiliating scenes, a storm of outrage broke out, especially since Arendt declared that one should advocate for equal political rights rather than social equality. I cannot go into details here, but you know probably more than I do. Instead of talking about the bad school situation of Black children, she expressed vehement indignation in her essay that even in 1957, the 14th and the 15th Amendments to the Constitution were still not enforced, and that Blacks in the South still had no civil rights, nor the right to vote. As we know, she was upset that instead of taking care of the Constitution and of equality in public institutions, people argued with school rights. What we, children of the welfare state, do not see is that Arendt's distrust has had another source. She suspected that the whites in the US, like the Germans in the 19th century, preferably feel guilty, feel pity, and give money or some privileges, but do not want to share power with the minorities in the country. No wonder that at the time, the end of the 50s, Arendt's idea of only Black rights matter was met with strong opposition by many. Her main argument of how a republic could turn a blind eye to a breach of its own constitution for decades was not only taken up, it was something that evidently was kept under silence. That's what she felt it. And the laws against interracial marriage in various southern states, as appalling as they were even more a political taboo at the time. So unlike Arendt's hope, nobody wanted to see what she thought being the famous political elephant in the room. I will leave this after observations at the moment for what they are. And to save time, I will skip another trace that I wanted to talk about, but I can't here. Her reading of W.E.B. Du Bois, because it's only recently that I came across that. So let me now attract your attention to a fourth trace of her Jewish Afro-American conversation, a letter from November 1962, from the time when the struggle for civil rights was still rather desperate. It says, the letter to Baldwin says in it, "Dear Mr. Baldwin, your article in the New Yorker is an event of a very high order, I think. It certainly is an event in my understanding of what is involved in the question. Here, as in her letter to, I don't quote further because, yeah. Here, as in her letter to Ellison 3 years later, she uses the word understanding. What is the background? On November 9th, Baldwin's blistering essay, Letter from a Region in My Mind, appeared in the New Yorker, and in it, he writes, in gripping Baldwin fashion, of his experience with brutality and humiliation as a child, as a youngster. He lets his reader take part in the hatred and violence he was subjected to day by day. The reader could feel and understand the devastation at the same time, probably Hannah Arendt too. Coming back to Arendt's own practice of public friendship, I want to say something very quickly. Baldwin's idea that the discourse of the relative conscious whites and the relative conscious blacks might end the racial nightmare, which was the end of the essay, must have corresponded to her idea of public friendship. But there is a passage in Baldwin's essay that she must have read as an direct response to her essay on Little Rock. I quote, "The Negro boys and girls who are facing mobs today, like in Little Rock, come out of a long line of improbable aristocrats, the only genuine aristocrats this country has produced. I say this country because their frame of reference was totally American. They were hewing out of the mountain of white supremacy the stone of their individuality. Quote, end of quote. That was Baldwin. The only genuine aristocrats, I was asking myself, their frame of reference was totally American. What Baldwin says here is that in their fights, the blacks were at the time explicitly addressing the values of the American Republic that had granted every person born in his country full citizenship and equal protection under the laws. That was Baldwin. Let me add that many other aspects of the essay must have caught Arendt's attention, namely the very powerful direct parallels Baldwin repeatedly draws between the black experience and the persecution of Jews in Europe. No wonder Baldwin's essay made a deep impression on her. She thanked and congratulated William Shawn, the editor of The New Yorker, for publishing it, a bold and brilliant essay, writing that she had been hardly able to think of anything else since she read it. In closing my lecture, we now come to the Ellison interview, to which Arendt responded with a puzzling letter. Let me start by saying, we can assume that in reading the interview, Arendt recognized that for all their differences, there were correspondences in Ellison's and her thought, or in their different ways of reflection. In my book, I made space for these inner correspondences, for example, between Hannah Arendt's concept of action in the human condition and the experiences of Ellison's invisible man. But let me quote here only one sentence from the interview that must have spoken to her. That was the James Baldwin I forgot. These are quotes from the interview, but I only quote one now. We are determined to bring Americans' conduct into line with its professed ideals. The obligation is dual, in fact mixed, to ourselves and to the nation. The blacks, he argued, were forcing the confrontation between the nation's conduct and its ideals. They live and act out the truth of American reality, he said. As this was resonating aspects of Baldwin's essay, Arendt must have understood Ellison's statement immediately. Blacks were engaging, even sacrificing themselves in their common struggle, not only for some particular goal, but for the sake of the entire nation. Let me quote you briefly from Ellison's critique, to which Arendt responded directly in her letter. At any rate, this too has been part of the American Negro experience, and I believe that one of the important clues to the meaning of that experience lies in the ideal of sacrifice. Hannah Arendt's failure to grasp the importance of this ideal among Southern blacks caused her to fly way off into left field in her reflections on Little Rock, in which she charged black parents with exploiting their children during the struggle to integrate the schools. But she has absolutely no conception of what goes on in the mind of black parents when they send their kids through these lines of hostile people. End of quote. So far the critique. In opening my lecture, I suggested that Hannah Arendt's short letter to Ellison could have served as a repository, as a kind of task she imposed on herself, the ideal of sacrifice. I will have to explore this concept further. And she did. In 1969, in light of increasing corruption, there's something missing, it doesn't matter. And in 1969, in light of increasing corruption, the Pentagon Papers, in light of the escalating student protests against the Vietnam War, and in light of the riots in the suburbs, she was invited to a conference entitled, Is the Law Dead? For that conference, she wrote her famous essay on civil disobedience, claiming that the two-party system in the United States excluded dissenters, and that it was imperative that this invalidation of representative democracy be corrected. The voiceless had to be given a voice. To this end, she argued for a new amendment guaranteeing the right to civil disobedience as a right for the non-represented by the political representation. One could think of these interventions of hers as an aftermath of Ellison's critique and as an aftermath of her letter. Her writings somehow did not echo the devastations of anti-black violence, but they echo the possibility that in times of upheaval, those who are not entangled in the continuum of power have to have the right to say their passionate word in renovating the world they live in. In my view, the story of this very short discourse between two independent thinkers sheds light on the affairs of men, what were talking about this morning. Thank you for your attention. Let me add one sentence. All the English was translated by Tess Lewis, but I had to shorten it. All the bad English came in, so the right is from Tess, and the not so good English is from me. Sorry.
Thank you so much, Marie-Louise, for this talk that draws together so many different pieces in a conversation, or you sort of hesitated on the threshold between calling it a conversation and not a conversation, and I want to get into that. But what I wanted to ask you first is how you come to this conversation, because you are you live in Germany, and as a German, you have a different perspective on, I think, what is called race relations in the US, right? And you also come from very much a literary background, and I'm wondering not so much about your personal biography, but about what it takes to look at this kind of connection between African-American authors and this Jewish German lady who escaped the Nazis, right? Does that make sense as a question?
Thank you for that question. It's an interesting question, and I think because, of course, there are many layers in why you do something. But the first thing was, is it okay? Does it work? Yeah, very good. Pardon? Okay. The first thing was that I came across this letter in an exhibition in Berlin, and it made me wonder what is happening there, the formal tone, and then this way of... But why did it make me wonder, and why did I go into it? Because in 1986, I published the first essays of Hannah Arendt in Germany, and one of the essays I wanted to publish was this Little Rock essay. And I was so upset about what was written in there, you can't imagine. I thought, what is that? But I had come across Hannah Arendt and some other essays, and I was amazed about how deeply she can look at things at the time. That was early. I was working in a publishing house at the time. And then I thought, what is that, and why is this essay so different from what we think and what I thought at the time? And I had the impression somehow it made me think, so I published it. But I didn't know whether it was a real... I didn't understand it at the time, but I saw there is something that I couldn't understand, and that seemed to me interesting. So I was 27 at the time. And then and then in between, I had edited the Gershom Scholem letter exchange, and I had edited in Germany the Jewish writings of Hannah Arendt. So I had an idea of what is happening in her ideas of Jewish history. That also came up when I saw the letter. And so after I saw the letter, I thought I have to, it's something that history wants from me to go back to my old story and to look at this again. But at the moment, in the beginning, like always, you start writing, you start asking yourself a question, and you don't know what happens. And that there would be a book coming out, I couldn't imagine. I thought I will think about it and I will do some research. So that's what I did. And after a while, I found that I had to go deeper into the politics of here, because I didn't know anything or not much about it. And so I started these researches on what is this the Black Democratic Party that was formed in Mississippi in 1964. So I came across a lot of different things that I knew nothing about, and I understood that, for example, was heißt Mischehe, the mixed marriage, that was not only a question of her being Jewish and being married to a guy, but that it was also a question of these were responsible for lynchings. And she had many, many different layers of thinking in it. And so I had to go through all the history. And I thought for me it's very important also because, of course, you learn much about the questions of today, about what means affiliation, what do you think about it. So it gave me a lot of interesting insights by writing it, but I always stopped writing it in between because, as you said, I'm not historian. So how do I deal with it in a way that I'm not writing history, because that's not what I can do. I'm an essayist, so it took me a time to find the form that I have now with these 17 small essays, which make it around, yeah.
And it's perhaps also worth noting and interesting how through this writing of this relationship, you're also thinking about Jewish-German relationships, right? There's a kind of echo or a doubling that happens when we think about the one with the other.
Yes, and another thing, you start thinking about what is the discussion now. Like in Germany, we have this discussion about the singularity of the Holocaust, and I think you have it here too. And the singularity discussion, for example, changed a lot for me while writing it, because I had the impression that she has a footnote in the essay on civil disobedience where she talks about the singularity of the slavery for the politics in the US. And so I thought we have always both universality and singularity. So it broadened up my mind about that singularity discussion too. And I thought you can go through history and find these questions that in reality, you are thinking about your own questions, and you go to these things and you find answers or maybe new questions for yourself.
So part of the tension in your talk was between the question whether this is an actual encounter, is this a conversation, or is this not a conversation between people with different experiences? And one of the obvious questions that I do want to pose to you is there a basis for friendship here? And in a larger sense, is the experience of persecution, exile, of extreme violence, and of discrimination, is that a basis for friendship in this case? Or would you see that more critically?
I would never, that's why I've somehow talked about the magnifying glass. I would never say there is a friendship here. As I said, I know through working in the archives that they met twice in their life. Whether they ever met anymore, I don't know. And I don't even know whether they talked to each other. But what I found interesting is the question, why did Hannah Arendt write the letter? I could only answer that he found something in the interview of Ellison that must have spoken to her. If not, it was two years after Eichmann, and you know, we all know how she survived Eichmann. But why did she answer a critique that was relating to a fact that was 8 years earlier? So that was a riddle for me. And I would say she felt an inner correspondence. And this is a correspondence of ideas about the Republic. And I think that is the center also in the Lessing article of hers. This is the center of friendship, of public friendship, not of private friendship. And in this sense, I would say yes, they were all dealing with the question of how America, the United States, could be a better place and could make it humanized for everyone. And she, as a Jew, was looking at things different than the Americans, but it was than the white Americans. And but it was clear for her that there is a ground for a debate about the public sphere with him. That's, I think, the reason why she wrote the letter and why I could talk about public friendship in it. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I think that's a useful way of thinking about it. I'm just going to ask one more question and then open it up for discussion. According to Jerry Cohn, who edited a lot of her writings in the US and who is a fervent supporter of the center and a dear friend of the center, James Baldwin and Hannah Arendt were friends. They hung out, and he remembers them hanging out. And friendship in Arendt's conception is a world-disclosing relation. That means that it's a relation that models political relations in Nusche and is always potentially directed towards the world. So based on your reading of these entanglements, what would you say about the importance of friendship between people who belong to different groups? And also about friendship in times of overwhelming political pressure. Does friendship in such situations carry a special weight?
That's an interesting question. Very, very interesting. But first of all, I have no idea where Jerry Cohn got that from, because in the letter of 62, she says at the end, sincerely, I don't know whether you remember me, we once met. Then they met in 64 because together Arendt, Ellison, and Baldwin were at the same day, the 1st of April, they were accepted in the American Academy of Arts and Letters. So that is the thing I know. I know that they had debates, but I don't see the friendship, I must say. So, but the question is not the friendship, but the question is whether we can have friendships in dark times when the situation gets more and more opposed because of your affiliation. That's what I understand. And that's something I'm always asking myself. You can see it now with the Ukrainians and Russians in Germany, or you can see it now with what we had, just the question of what Roger was talking of, and we were talking just now about the question of can a Palestinian and Israeli talk to each other at the moment. And I think seeing it with her Lessing essay, I would say Hannah Arendt would say no, because as soon as the territory of freedom of what we can talk in friendship, as soon as the territory gets less and less, gets, wie heißt das, es schwindet und schwindet. What is the English word of, disappears more and more. And you have more and more fields of communication that you have to keep silent because you can't talk about it. Then I think the friendship disappears. But you can try to stick to the fact that you want to talk about something, but the silence makes you a slave, Hannah Arendt said, and I think she's right.
And I mean, maybe that goes back to the question that came
Yeah.
from the audience earlier about the basis of friendship, right? There has to be a space where it is possible. Thank you so much. Questions? Yes. The gentleman with the beard.
Yeah, this is just a short question, but I mean, a lot of the conversations today have touched on maybe a difference between political friendship and intimate personal friendship and things like that. And, you know, Arendt's essay and Ellison's interview are both in public forums. They're public statements, whereas her letter to him is a private correspondence. It's not like an open letter. It's not meant for publication. Do you think that's significant in any way?
Yes. It's significant, and I think there is a large critique to it, that she kind of didn't come back to it, but she wrote a letter, which we don't know whether he ever got it, because it's only in her archives, but she wrote a letter, and then it rested private. And this is why, if she understood something, she didn't go back to it. I think it's a question. That's part of the question why I started to do the research. And I would say that she didn't revise her ideas about reflections on Little Rock, but she understood that she had not thought about some essential things. And I wonder why she didn't, because as far as I learned from my researches, the black communities, the communities finance the schools. So she had to think about the fact that the black schools never had any money. And the white schools in the white communities always had money. So this is a problem that I think she should have thought about, and the lack of empathy, the lack of understanding of the life of the blacks. But the question of for her, I'm afraid, the question of the rights, first the rights and not the social, and the social has to be, the discrimination in the social has to be talked about on a different level than the politics. And she wrote her article in 1957, and the letter is from 1965, at the time when the civil rights were just guaranteed, signed on. So the situation is totally different. So why should she say, at that time, I didn't think about that and that? So I think she wrote the letter to be clear that there's something wrong, and she read and understood the critique, but she didn't want to go into the question, what should I write instead? But she thought with it in the further time. And I think we also have to see that in On Violence, she's criticizing the black movement much, as we know, and she didn't want to make a statement on that, but she wanted to think about the idea of the ideal of sacrifice and of the idea of the blacks are part of constituting this United States. Maybe that's an answer? I don't know.
More questions?
Da oben ist eine.
Yeah, back.
I'm wondering if I'm new to Hannah Arendt and just starting to really read her in the very beginnings, and I'm wondering if she addressed the Native American situation.
I didn't understand the question, sorry. Can you speak louder?
Yes, I'm wondering if she, in her explorations and writings, have explored the Native American like she has the African American. As far as racism and genocide.
No, she didn't. As far as I know, she did only by talking about the Afro-Americans, she also talked about the natives, but she didn't say anything. I think Reflections on Little Rock is mainly the only thing she said on these questions.
The origins of totalitarianism are an instructive text in terms of notions of expansion and colonial appropriation.
Yeah. There is another one. There is one.
Hi, thank you. Is that good? You said something very enticing about W.E.B. Du Bois and then said you wouldn't say anything about it. So can I ask you to say something about it?
Now you can go into the library of Hannah Arendt and you find that she had read a book of her, but as she never quoted it anywhere, because for me, quotations, like for all of us, I think quotations are also sort of friends. And I don't know whether they ever met, Du Bois and Hannah Arendt, but she has a book, The Black Reconstruction of the Reconstruction of America and the Black Role, and it's interesting what she wrote, where she made her marginal notes. It's often where she sees the parallel between the blacks and the Jews and the Jewish experience. And it's also about the question of how Jefferson was acting with the Afro-Americans and how he was thinking about slavery in a very muddy way. So there were huge marginalia. And I think it's interesting because she read things that we don't know, and her library is only a small part of what she read. She must have read a lot of things. And the marginalia are very vivid. So you see that she really was into that, but you don't see why or whatever she made out of it. But it's interesting because Du Bois makes the same thing. He talks about the question of how the Afro-Americans were part of the Constitution of the United States. That's his subject in the book. And that's fantastic to see that you have this underground, and that makes you also, that echoes the ideal of sacrifice. But I don't know when she read it, so I can't.
I mean, is it possible that as she always took her own experience as a basis and as a starting point for her thinking, for her thoughts, she didn't have a lot of encounters and a lot of like lived experience with Native Americans, with Afro-Americans. So that lack of experience, that she kind of acknowledged it and knew that she wouldn't have much to say about it. It not being part of her social life, really, and that's a problem. It's an issue. It makes that reality invisible in her work. But maybe it's also, I don't know, truthful or honest in a way.
I don't know. I don't want to judge. I don't know. But I must say that I have the impression she didn't search for it, for encounters. I'm not sure she was searching for going to spaces, public spaces, where she could have discussed it. But I have no idea. I don't know. And I must say, yeah, speculations here for me are not helpful. And I see that she was thinking about the question, and that's what interested me. Da hinten gibt es einen Studenten, ne?
Thanks. One interesting point of comparison is the point at which Arendt engages similarly with the question of race relations in the US on violence, when she comments on the role of Black Power and Black Panthers in universities and the police reaction. It's been about 2 years since I've read that essay in detail, but my own reading was very much analogous to the one that you give of her reading of in the Little Rock essay, which was that she was in fact very much thinking from the perspective of rights first, so a very formal political perspective rather than a sort of a lived experience or an experience of discrimination perspective. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that, in part because On Violence is a much later essay, so it comes after her letter to Ellison.
Yeah, I have, but it's speculation. I read this article again and again, and especially the parts about the Black students that you mentioned, because, and I quoted one part of it in my book, because there is one saying that these Blacks now want their own syllabus, they want their own studies, and they want Black studies, and they don't want to be part of our society anymore. That's what she says there, but she says other things. But I must say that I don't know what happened, but there is this, I was thinking of a story of Adorno, but do you know Adorno, anyone? But the people, the 68 movement, who was going to Frankfurt and came to the university and was, was heißt sprengen, and they didn't want the students to be with Adorno, so they, was heißt eine Vorlesung sprengen? Pardon? They burst into the lectures, and Adorno was freezing because he was thinking of this the Nazis who bursted into the university in 1933, and this image was many of the immigrants who came back to Germany had this in 1968 and talked about that. And so I was thinking about whether for Hannah Arendt there was this parallel to, I do not know, but suddenly when I read this, I was thinking of the Adorno description, and it made me think, what is that? But yeah, that's all I can, this is my speculation on it.
One final question. Yes. Michael?
I hope this isn't asking you to speculate, which I appreciate the unhelpfulness of, but I'm just wondering, in the lack of understanding that comes across in the letter to Ellison, which is a note to herself, I think, in your reading, right? That's what you're suggesting, that it feels very much like a note to self, that in a lot of the discourse that's been happening about Arendt and race, we notice how little she visited. She wants the imagination to go visiting, and she puts it with representative thinking. She had a lot of opportunity to do that on Riverside Drive, right, where she lived. It's a very mixed neighborhood if she'd really wanted.
Could you slow down, please?
Sorry, I'm a New Yorker. I'll slow
yes,
down.
I'm a Berliner.
Yeah,
I know
ich weiß.
it's province from
Sorry. Yeah,
Berlin and New York.
You all speak fast too, but
no.
Point is, I guess it's just the Christianity is what I want to say. That that in particular, what she's grappling with maybe, and this isn't about judging her or was she racist or not, is that the difficulty of visiting and sort of understanding her fellow Americans, she believes at least that there's no reason to doubt that she's in profound sympathy with Black Americans.
Yeah.
And that, so why, right, and trying to unpack that mystery of how she could have so little understood them when it's so important to her in all the ways we've been talking about all day. And I'm just wondering, right, and we're not going to solve this in 3 seconds or 3 minutes, but that it's a dawning awareness that comes out in the letters to Ellison and to Baldwin that there's she has some unfinished business with Christianity, actually.
With what?
Christianity, Christlichkeit. So
Christentum, okay.
Because the ideal of sacrifice, this is I hope it's not controversial to say, this is highly religious language, right?
This is what?
Highly religious language.
Yes, but the sacrifice here is not religious at all. That's what I in the beginning,
So
when
right, so
it
that
took
would be
me
the...
some time to understand, but why do you think
right,
it is?
Because that's what Ellison is talking about.
Okay.
Right? So vergiss mich, right? But that's the idea, is that Arendt's coming to terms, and I think the footnote in Civil Disobedience that you're pointing to is a real sign of this, that her account of slavery in On Revolution, which is before the interview with Ellison, is really different from the way she comes to understand slavery, and talks about it even in On Violence when she's writing things that are awful, in many cases, about Black Americans. Something has changed, I'm thinking, it's a general wonderment, and it's about religion. And that's a real blind spot for her in sort of understanding Black America. The solidarity across difference and racial difference, that's a challenge, but it seems to me her imagination crosses that divide. But the religion remains an issue. Like the role of the church and the Du Bois interest is a sign of this. And of course, it's a kind of missing influence because we don't have enough traces of it in her writing. But Du Bois is someone who's super sensitive to the intersection of political economy and religion in the Black experience.
We can let Marie-Louise answer.
I'm not sure. Wenn ich jetzt ganz kurz, shortly.
I mean, maybe the question is also, is there only a religious notion of a sacrifice here?
Ah, that was your question? I understood something else, but I don't know. As far as I understood, you want to say that there is the Christian notion. Ellison has the Christian notion, and Hannah Arendt didn't think of it. That's what you wanted to say?
And later, so when she writes in 62, when she writes to Baldwin, you're just dead wrong in that last paragraph.
No. This is a public question. The love story with Baldwin, we can go into that, but not now. It's a question of public friendship and of private friendship. This is a totally different subject. But I don't think that, to come to an end, I don't think that Hannah Arendt was thinking of it as a Christian term, and I don't think Ellison was thinking of it as a Christian term neither here in this question, because it's the question of, not of the sheep-goat, but it's the question of you are doing something for, we the minority, are those who see clearer what is not right in this society. That's the sacrifice thing, but I think so. But we can talk on that. Many thanks for the question. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I am announcing two things. This was the last panel for tonight, but we have at 5:55, or right now rather, we have a student fellow reading of a poem. Maggie Hugh will read Poem for Friends Only by W.H. Auden. And I also wanted to call your awareness to a student exhibit in the hallways of the Student Center that was specially organized by the fellows and is dedicated to the theme of the Conference of Friendship and Politics. Thank you.
And thank you, Jana.
For Friends Only by W.H. Auden. Ours, yet not ours, being set apart as a shrine for friendship. Empty and silent most of the year, this room awaits from you what you alone as visitor can bring. A weekend of personal life. In a house backed by orderly woods, facing a tractored sugar beet country, your working hosts engage to their stint. You are unlike to encounter dragons or romance. Were drama a craving, you would not have come. Books we do have for almost any literate mood, and notepaper envelopes for a writing one. To borrow stamps is a mark of ill breeding. Between lunch and tea, perhaps a drive. After dinner, music or gossip. Should you have troubles, pets will die, lovers are always behaving badly, and confession helps, we will hear it, examine, and give our counsel. If to mention them hurts too much, we shall not be nosy. Easy at first, the language of friendship, is, as we soon discover, very difficult to speak well, a tongue with no cognates, no resemblance to the gallimatias of nursery and bedroom, court rhyme or shepherd's prose, and unless spoken often, soon goes rusty. Distance and duties divide us, but absence will not seem an evil if it make our re-meeting a real occasion. Come when you can, your room will be ready. In Tum Tum's reign, a tin of biscuits on the bedside table provided for nocturnal munching. Now weapons have changed, and the fashion of appetites. There, for sunbathers who count their calories, a bottle of mineral water. Felicissima notte, may you fall at once into a cordial dream, that whoever slept in this bed before was also someone we like, that within our circle of affection also you have no double.